Good afternoon, Dr. Karwan.
Hi there.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Thank you very much for joining me with this interview for UIF training session. Today I want to ask you about entrepreneurship here at Furman in general and your expectation for students here at Furman in your entrepreneurship class. So the first question would be, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and your education background?
Okay, yeah, I'm, as you say, I'm Kirk Karwan, and I'm a business professor here at Furman. I have two degrees, bachelor's and master's degrees in engineering science from Johns Hopkins University, and I have a PhD, not in business, but in public policy and management from Carnegie Mellon University.
That's interesting.
Nonetheless, despite this, I have taught for 35 years in business programs. Mm-hmm. I've taught previously at Tulane University, at Duke University, at the University of South Carolina, and I came to Furman about 10 years ago. I actually came here when the business program actually began its own existence alone. Business spun out of what was called economics and business administration, very much dominated by the economics part of the program. In the early 2000s, there was a lot more pressure for the business major to be enhanced, and the department was a bit resistant because it was dominated by economists. And the president of the university did a study, had an outside study actually evaluated, and elected to split the two departments. I came actually to Furman as chair of the business and accounting department, partly to sort of sort out what was not being done in business and was sort of many of the things that the business department hadn't embarked on yet. And I think that the folks that had been here over a number of years didn't have as much perspective on what was possible. My experience, basically, that's relevant for all of this in innovation and entrepreneurship, is that when I was teaching, this was in about 1990, at the University of South Carolina, I became involved in a project at some of the national defense labs in the United States. In particular, there were two of them. One was called the Savannah River Site, which is here in South Carolina, and the second was the Oak Ridge Laboratories in Tennessee. And I became involved in education programs where we were looking at how to commercialize some of the ideas developed in these federal laboratories. And a number of universities in South Carolina were invited to be involved, and I was involved as a USC, University of South Carolina professor. And I spent 5 summers actually involved in these activities. And during those periods of time, I actually worked with people on this question, trying to figure out what are the key variables that enable you to take a laboratory idea and move it as far along from just a basic scientific idea to something that's actually applicable to even how do you get it commercialized or used in a product or service out in the marketplace. And in that period, as I began to study it, I got really interested in the seriousness of innovation at a national level and at a corporate level, and even what it takes to motivate somebody as an individual. At the same time, in the middle of that period, I decided to embark on some new pedagogy at the University of South Carolina, and I'll call it invented, a course called the Management of Technology and Innovation. And I started that course at the University of South Carolina. It's still in their books, and they use it in all their programs. Not actually at the undergraduate level, because it's sort of a more theoretical and academic sort of assessment of, what organizations have to do to be successful in innovation. I taught that class until the day that I left, pretty much, and came to Furman in 2005. At the same time, at the university there, we had an entrepreneurship center, and I had some colleagues that were in a different department, but they were involved in teaching the entrepreneurship classes. When I came to Furman, I considered the kind of class that I told you that I was working or had taught at South Carolina. And what I opted to do was to start investigating what schools like Furman were actually doing in the innovation and entrepreneurship arena. It turns out what I found out was that most of them our size or that were liberal arts schools at most were teaching perhaps an entrepreneurship class. Most of them weren't doing that at all. So I enlisted some help from a couple people at other schools. One of my former colleagues at South Carolina came to Furman and met with our faculty here because I wanted him to explain what was different about entrepreneurship and what they were doing relative to what Furman was doing at the time. We also discussed what were the opportunities for a small school. Interestingly, he had a daughter himself who graduated from Furman as a psychology major, and he actually had a lot of familiarity with how we operated and what would make sense. What we came to was a conclusion that we would have to do it in a different way, and that we'd probably instead of splitting it into lots of different courses, we would split entrepreneurship possibly into two kinds of ways of thinking. One would be a core class in the principles of entrepreneurship that would also include something about partially developing a business plan for an organization. Doesn't have to be a for-profit business, could be anything. And what we decided was that it would be more likely that what students would be able to do is what I call a feasibility study, which is sort of part of a business plan, but not all the detail because you just couldn't get to all that in a single semester. So in the spring of 2006, I introduced a class that we call Entrepreneurship and New Venture Development, and that class has been taught for 10 years now here at Furman. We would also simultaneously consider putting in another class that would be more of a project-oriented course that would really be the full-blown business plan and perhaps some other sorts of things where we would interact more with people outside the institution. Now, don't get me wrong, in the development of that first class, I had a lot of speakers come in. The current professor who's been teaching it the last couple of years does the same thing, and we interact with some of the local entrepreneurial groups in, like the Next Center in Greenville. We've been with them and had them come to our classes, and we've had a lot of good interactions with the community. Unfortunately, to this point, quite honestly, at least in our department, we haven't been able to go any further with it. We pretty much are maxed out in terms of our staffing, and the business and accounting majors are both really popular, so we have not been able to develop that second class that I talked about. It's something that we're pretty passionate about, would be really very well received. The possibility of another class, for example, at Furman that would make sense would be a social entrepreneurship class where we would focus more on nonprofit organizations. I mean, there'd be a lot of similarities in what we would do, but we could make it more project-oriented and perhaps orient toward those organizations that we would be trying to assist, or the types of organizations.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you very much for your really detailed answer. And given your interest in entrepreneurship, to those who don't know, who may not know, can you define entrepreneurship and, can you tell how is it relevant to the demand of the workforce here in America?
Demands of the workforce. Okay. The difference. Okay, it's interesting because I did jump through that pretty fast. But if you, for example, in our department, if you learn sort of standard business, you learn all the functions that go on in business, and even I'll admit some of our faculty would tell you that. Once you learn all those functions in business, you can sort of put it together, and it doesn't matter whether it's a new business or not. But remember what I said about the way we named that class, Entrepreneurship and New Venture Development. The fact is, what's really significant in new ventures, in startup ventures, in many small ventures, some of the components of what you do and what you really have to focus on in order to succeed can be different. What happens in a company in its startup stage can be quite different than what happens in its mature life when the product is well known in the marketplace and that sort of thing. You could picture this. You haven't really begun something, or you're just starting it, so you have to figure out how to make it or provide the service. You haven't sold it before. The marketplace doesn't know anything about it. You haven't even maybe constructed the team that's involved in this. If you don't put the right group of people together, you're probably not going to succeed. There are just lots of things that go on differently about entrepreneurship. Now, so what is So the way I see entrepreneurship is that part of forming a business where you go from new idea to where the business actually begins to function and how it actually grows to the point where it can succeed. You can consider it only as the startup phase where we actually open the doors and literally sign papers and somebody is inside a building or even just sitting at home talking about it. But what we're talking about is how, what's the difference between failure and success? Anybody can come up with an idea. Can you bring it to fruition? Perhaps, in business parlance, commercialize the idea, get it to the point where somebody cares about it. And so if you want to be a little more academic about the whole thing, entrepreneurship it comes from. So what does it sort of sound like? Actually, it's entre sounds French. Preneur is the verb prendre, to take.
I'd agree.
So it's actually kind of so to take between in French, sort of. And so what do you mean take between what? Again, it's taking an idea to some other place.
Entre maybe enter, and
Entre.
yes, I think that's what I learned in French, but I don't know. Like entre, I think I don't know how to pronounce it, but entre and is enter, and prone.
Entree. See,
Entree, maybe.
Yeah. See,
yes, I don't know.
So anyway, that's that.
Yes,
so and actually, the
okay.
word was coined. The word entrepreneurship was actually coined. It's really a wild story. It's a guy with a Spanish name who actually grew up in the British Isles, who wrote books in French, and that's where the word actually came from. There's a great, I think it was Richard Karwan. I don't remember exactly the name. I used to know that a little better, but it's kind of a neat story. But that's the idea, is the word actually does have something to do with it. It makes some level of sense. And so when we talk about, again, when we credit entrepreneurs and we get kind of excited about this, it's not because there are people that can take mature organizations and make them do things better. That's what basic study of business and organizations is about. But this whole thing about entrepreneurship, I argue, that is a little bit different, is the front end of getting things going really takes perhaps a different set of skills, different kinds of people, and different kind of luck maybe to even make things happen, because that's definitely involved in this.
Yes, thank you very much. And so I want to ask you about, like the clash between your idea of entrepreneurship class and, the reality here that you see in the Southern environment, and, maybe there can be some traditional values that, people may be resistant to your idea at first in setting up such a class about entrepreneurship.
No, I don't think. No,
you don't think?
No. Oh, no. I think that the only clash is whether or not the university wants to make an investment in this. Furman is kind of a pretty classical place with a lot of departments. We're a liberal arts school. We have. We have all the major sorts of disciplines that you'd expect. We have physical sciences, we have social sciences, we have the humanities, we have the arts. Those are our sort of four major dimensions of the university. And then we have these pre-professional type programs like business. A lot of health sciences is sort of that way. You may not have thought about it this way, but it's sort of how we're structured. And entrepreneurship, to some extent, is one of those things that fits across lots of, ties disciplines together, or can do that. And so, even in most schools, not just at Furman, there has to be a place for this. If a business school that is large has a department that somehow has enough a core of faculty that are interested in this, or they have been given an endowment to pursue an entrepreneurship program, which a number of them have. They have centers, somebody's center for entrepreneurship. The school will do that. But when schools are smaller, or they're pretty much in their own little boxes, what has to happen in order to do this is there has to either be that critical mass of faculty, which our business program isn't that big to really have one just in that area. It would have to happen, like many other interdisciplinary things across campus, where some other entity would be created. And I actually share the feeling of some other people on campus that would be the way to go about this. But it would we don't have many entities like that exist.
Okay, I can see how the problem can be. So how about the students? Do you have any expectation about, like, when you started the class, do you have any expectation how the students gonna respond, how they gonna perform, something like that?
Well, actually, I don't suppose I had a lot of expectations. Let me tell you the most interesting thing that I found about teaching that class at Furman. One is it's a lot of fun.
Okay.
You could bring in a lot of interesting people, and the topics you would talk about are really fascinating.
Okay.
Okay, that's one positive thing.
Yes.
But I have to tell you, may surprise you.
Okay.
I asked the students at the end of my first year, I said, so what do you think about this class? And I said, and I don't want you to comment on me or how I conducted it or anything like that. I say, you've listened to me and us discuss lots of material. You've seen a lot of visitors. Kind of fun. What do you think of this? And you know what I got from about half of them?
What did he say?
They said, I've learned that I'll never do this. Now, what were they saying to me? And what they were saying
really
is
surprising.
that the stories of entrepreneurship are that you will have successes and you will have failures. Successful entrepreneurs have to be willing. This is like chapters 1, 2, and 3 in the books, let's say. Or you can go out and Google it, right? Read about what are the characteristics of entrepreneurs. And
yes.
The reality is the characteristics are they have to be willing to undertake risks because they will fail. Successful entrepreneurs will learn very much from their failures. Now, it's not that they're silly or stupid. It's that they're trying. They're actually, there's no guarantee that an idea works really well. You can build a product and think that it's the greatest thing, and it may be before its time. It may be slightly after its time. You don't there may be some funny thing going on caused by politics or other products that are out there or almost anything that are beyond your control. And entrepreneurs will fail. But the best entrepreneurs will fail many times, and they will succeed. And the students did learn that, and they also learned that it's hard work.
Yes.
And so that's why I always found that. I was really stunned by it, but I shouldn't have been. I should have realized that would have been the first thing that a lot of Furman students would take away from it.
Yes. I mean, there are a lot of kinds of students. Like, there are some students who are willing to take risk, but there are some not. So it really depends on, their personalities. And, like, me, I'm willing to, but there are some people who would prefer, a stable profession,
exactly.
So that they can go chase after that. But it's a really interesting story.
You know what is also true is that in my years as in particular since I was chair of the department here for 6 years, I've met a lot of people. The folks in the university have introduced me to quite a few folks who are Furman graduates, and a lot of successful ones. I mean, the ones that have been at least financially quite successful have been entrepreneurs. And interestingly, they would tell you all the things that I just implied, which is they failed,
yes.
A couple of times. I've met one or two of them who've had 3 or 4 very good successes.
Okay, that's good.
But their stories are very much the same. Is that you better be comfortable with this idea, or you will never be. You just won't have a chance at succeeding. I can't tell you, I would not tell you that those people that have taken on the challenge of entrepreneuring successfully graduated from Furman and then became entrepreneurs. I would never tell you they're from the same discipline because I don't think that's true. These are people that could have been studying anything at Furman. And to me, that's also important. So by the way, when I tell you that I taught this class and we teach it, we encourage students of all majors to be in it. My first 3 years I taught it, the best students in each of those classes were in one of the arts. They wrote the best business plans.
Oh.
One of them was an art student. One of them was a music student.
That's awesome.
Maybe the second one was an arts. Third one might have been an art student too.
Can you tell me about that?
Well, what happened in that, I described it a little bit earlier, but what I had in that class, the intention was always, from my perspective, and what was exciting about doing this at Furman, was that it could be a class that could be valuable to anybody. You didn't have to go study everything that we teach in business to be this. Mm. And again, the data would show you that entrepreneurs come from any sort of walk of life. So I encourage students in other majors, and some of the professors in the arts actually had students who thought that their artistic skills were never going to make them enough money to live the lifestyles they wanted to.
Okay.
But their passion for it was really strong, and their desire to work in those environments was there, so they thought about how could I run a business that surrounded what I was passionate about. And that's true of anybody, frankly. You can, if you're clever enough and you come think about this, you can take whatever it is that you do and figure out how to make it into something that other people value, and you have a chance to run an organization. So I keep using the word business, but mostly I mean organization. So anyway, that's what those students did, and they came up with, how could I run I'm a musician, but I know I'm not talented enough to make money at it, but what could I do in the musical world?
Yes.
That sort of thing.
Really interesting. Can you share for me one example, maybe from a graduate student who, are not business major, but he set up an entrepreneurship enterprise, and he succeeded with it. Like, what how did he design his business, and like just one example?
No, I'll give you an example, and it won't actually be a Furman student, because since I haven't done the class in the last 3 years, I probably haven't kept up as much. But I'll give you one from just before when I came to Furman, because it's a great example. Right before I came to Furman, and another indication that I was kind of interested in this, I was supervising an undergraduate thesis for an honors college student at the University of South Carolina. She was a student I had had in class, and she liked my operations management class, and she knew I was doing this other stuff at the graduate level, and she said, I want to do my master's thesis on opening a wedding shop.
A wedding shop?
For brides, for the wedding gowns and things like that.
That's cool.
And at first I went, I don't know, what about this? I mean, it's not just, of course, operations, it's also about marketing. So we wound up with 2 professors supervising 2 students, but one of them in particular had really come to the fold because of me. And she was from, not too far from here, actually, up in North Carolina, in western North Carolina. Okay. But she was at the University of South Carolina. And she did her master's thesis, and we really pushed both of them to do a heck of a job. What would it take? Where would you locate this thing? How could you actually sell wedding dresses? How much would it cost? So it was marketing, operations, where are you going to get them from? What are you going to do? All right. Well, they wrote the thesis, and they came to the conclusion. We really held their feet to the fire, and they did a heck of a nice job with it, and they came to the conclusion that there was no way you could open a sophisticated upscale dress shop for weddings in Columbia, South Carolina, which is where the university is, or Greenville for that matter.
Oh my gosh.
Maybe Charleston is what they concluded, but more likely Charlotte or Atlanta you'd have to go to. All right. The same young lady graduated that year, and her dream was to basically go to New York and learn fashion, like so many people do.
Yes.
Right? She had no way to do it. She was a very bright person, I can tell you. And she went to New York and had a friend that graduated the year before and was living in New York, and she begged if I could stay on your sofa for 2 weeks. So she went to New York looking for a job, started going around companies, knocking on doors, asking for them in every fashion business she could find. And basically she got a job, and I'm not kidding this. Kidding about this. She basically landed the job of Anne Hathaway in the movie The Devil Wears Prada.
That's awesome.
Now, the way I can tell you this whole story is because she came to Furman about 5 years ago and came to class and told her story. So she won an award back at the University of South Carolina from entrepreneurship. Okay. And I saw the story, and I called her up and I said, do you remember me? She says, of course I remember you. She said, and I have a great story to tell you. Actually, I'd read the story, what happened. That's what I'm going to tell you the last couple minutes here. Okay. What she did is she went to New York, and I'm finally getting to the answer to your question, by the way. Okay. Which is, what you have to do as an entrepreneur is you got to understand what it is that you're doing. So the industry that you're interested in, you have to understand more than anything else. So the first thing anybody would tell you is to go out and get your feet wet or your hands dirty in that industry. Understand what matters. So what she decided to do was she went to New York, wanted to get that job and live the dream of that, but she learned the fashion industry and what matters. She learned everything she could about it. She wasn't making enough money to survive at first, but as she worked up, she was starting to do better and better. But she also was I'm overstating this, but she was a North Carolina girl and said, I don't want to stay up here eventually. So she stayed about if I can remember, it was about 5 years or something like that. And in about her 4th year, she started saying, I want to go back to the Carolinas, I think. I just want to live there. But I want to take what I now know, because while she worked in the fashion industry, she started to understand what the suppliers do and what's important and what determines design. So she was kind of living her dream, to understand the industry more.
Yes.
And when she was coming back to the Carolinas, she said, what am I going to do with all that stuff? And what she did is she said, and it's what it said in the story, is she picked up her undergraduate thesis and dusted it off and opened it up and read it. And it said, you could run a dress shop, and it did the financials and the marketing stuff and everything else it said, how could you do that? And it said you had to go to a certain place. Okay, well, she decided to live the dream. She went to her parents, said, look, I want to open this in the Carolinas. I think I've got it figured out where to go. And she said, I think I want to try Charleston. So she went to Charleston, South Carolina, opened up I think the shop still exists with that name. It's called Madison Row, which she's still the first part of it is from New York City, I guess.
Okay.
And she opened up a dress shop, and she started selling very upscale wedding dresses. And she knew she had to do it in a place. And when she came up here where people would go to buy expensive dresses. Now, if you know anything about South Carolina, which anybody watching some of this might do, is that Charleston would probably be the most uppity sort of place where there's some more high price things than anywhere else. Greenville's developed some, but Charleston's probably got more. And so what happened is she chose Charleston, found a location. Her parents said, honey, we're going to help you with this the best we can. This is going to be difficult. But I'm going to tell you, she started the business. She figured out how to break even within 2 years. She really did need mom and dad's money for a while. By the 3rd year, she was really starting to make money. The business took off really well. She believed in all the things that matter in that realm of entrepreneurship, developing customer service and, providing everything you need.
Yes.
She had a great story when she came up and told our students. And then she said, I'm making money and all this. Now, I had a lot of guys in that class, Furman guys.
Okay.
And they said, well, you keep talking about expensive dresses, right? Mm-hmm. Like, what are you talking about?
Oh.
And now I can remember this clearly. One of the guys was a very good football player we had, a really bright guy. And he was there and saying, well, so how much is that going to cost him? And she said, well, how much do you think? And he says, well, I don't know, like $100. You know what she said?
So,
average dress I sell is $4,600. And this was 5 years ago.
Oh my gosh.
And so and you know what? She sold the business, made money, and actually opened up another business because then she got married, now has a child.
Okay.
And she wanted a business that didn't require as much customer service. But my point is, she was successful.
Okay.
And when she came up and taught, and could explain everything that I kind of just implied. One was, you had to go get the experience. Mm-hmm. You were going to work hard. You can imagine her long hours, how much time she spent with families to help them, to convince them to buy. It's not just the sales part of the dresses. You're going to provide extraordinary customer service when your clients are going to spend that kind of money. You can imagine what the brides expect.
Okay.
You're in the business of psychology too.
That's awesome. Wow.
Now, I'm positive we've had some successes. I'm not sure I can give you as big a one at Furman in the last years. I'm sorry, I don't have any. If I have come up with something else, I'll let you know.
Yes.
Personally.
Well, that's good enough. That's persuasive enough.
Okay.
I really like it. Well, I think that we are running out of battery.
Okay.
How about, do you mind if I turn this off and then record another one, which we can move
sure,
into
that's fine.
another?
Sure, of course.
Okay.